It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Welcome to the Barr Exam. I'm Adam Barr, and I'll be your host and moderator. I'm here because I want to know what's on your mind. I've been a teacher for 23 years, and I'm here to listen to my students and find out what they're thinking on a variety of topics. Let's get to it and subject these kids to the Barr Exam. Welcome to our first podcast. Like the intro said, I'm Adam Barr. I've been an educator for 23 years, and I'm always really curious what my students think and what's on their mind and what's going on in the head of students. So I don't really want to take over. I just want to moderate this. So I'm going to ask a simple question today and really hopefully let the students run it. I have a kind of one-sided panel today with two what we would call honors students who are wonderful, who will introduce themselves in a second. So basically, my question is, what makes a teacher a good teacher? I mean, from my side, schools are always trying to quantify teaching and education, with administrators assigning scores to teachers for different things. Teachers among ourselves say, you just know what a good teacher is when you see one. So I want to see what students think makes a good teacher. So let my little panel introduce themselves today. So first.
Hi, my name is Morgan.
And my name is Alexis.
All right, I guess we'll just start with whoever wants to speak first. In your mind, what makes a teacher a good teacher?
My first thing, I definitely believe that the biggest impact a teacher has is whether or not they like the subject they're teaching, because I think that will definitely have an effect on whether the student likes it. So if you're absolutely miserable teaching a subject, the student's going to be miserable learning it, and they're not going to have any interest, they're not going to pay attention, and they're just not going to do very well.
So then would we have any math teachers? You know, we need people to really love their subject matter?
I think a good handful of our math teachers would not be here anymore.
That is true.
I definitely agree with Morgan in that, the student has to be engaged in what the teacher is teaching, which means that the teacher also has to be engaged in it and actually want the students to learn what it is that they're teaching. Because, of course, education is important, but it's also not just learning the facts, but also getting a takeaway and learning how to study, which you talk about quite often, and learning how you learn yourself, which is also very important. And I think a lot of the times teachers tend to talk at the students rather than actually teaching and talking with the students, which is a difficult environment to learn in because you're not actually remembering any of the information because the experience of the learning is not memorable whatsoever.
I guess I'll ask the selfish question then. I've been told even now that I'm a good teacher, and I don't feel like a good teacher, which is where this question came from. 10 years ago, I was a great teacher, but now I kind of feel mediocre. So just with the definitions you gave, how do I still fall into the good teacher category when I myself don't feel like a good teacher?
I guess that ultimately depends on how the students feel and how they feel engaged, because you do seem to have a lot of care, or at least some sort of care for the subject you're teaching. When you talk, you get very passionate and you make labs very exciting. You make them engaging. You do what you can keep us interested, and because you do that, we are interested, and so we're more likely to remember things that happen, like the mating lab, which was very interesting. We're probably not going to forget that for a while.
Yeah, definitely not. I think that an extra thing too is you take that extra time to look for more things to help the students understand, looking for extra case studies that, touch on the subject that we're learning, but also something outside kind of the subject that we're learning, so that, again, it makes it more memorable and you can connect back to that said thing.
Do you think when the world is trying to decide what's a good teacher, that student grades and test scores should be tied to whether a teacher is a good teacher or not?
Honestly, I feel like no, because there's a lot of students who just struggle or have their own learning disabilities, and I feel like a lot of the time everybody is put at the same bar or the same level that is unrealistic, because the same teaching style doesn't work for everybody, which means they're going to work better with different teachers than they are all having one teacher who functions the same way. So if they're in a class where, say, they're a hands-on learner and it's all just lectures, they're probably not going to do well as if they were in a lab. So the grades are going to reflect that, but that doesn't entirely show the capability or what the teacher is teaching them.
I mean, once again, I kind of agree with Morgan, and my perspective is that the grades of a student isn't, I mean, it's partially a reflection of the teacher, that's just how the structure of education is, but it's not completely a reflection of the teacher. It's also a reflection of how willing the student is to put in the work. Because I know there's people that will stay after with certain teachers almost like every day if they don't understand a subject, and then there's other students that just don't show up to class half the time. So it's also on the student, mainly like the reflection of their grades.
And then the two of you, in my mind, are like the perfect students. Do you think the definition would change for other students, where the two of you are intrinsically motivated, interested in school, and here all the time? Do you think the definition would change for students who don't come to school as often? Do you think they would view what's a good teacher or a bad teacher differently than you do?
Yeah, I definitely think the definition varies for a lot of people. I know for a lot of people, a big thing is the relationship that they have with the teacher, which I think is another positive reflexive of you. We have a very good relationship with us and you care about us, because you have some teachers who it's just they hate kids. They're probably only teaching for a power trip, but that it definitely varies for other people. Relationships have a big part of it. I also think some students only care about like if they're a nice person or mean person sometimes, depending on what kind of student they are.
I think that, you know, the definition will definitely change, honestly, from even person to person. Like other people that are in this class, the definition's gonna change because, again, everybody learns differently, but also everybody expects sometimes something different out of their education than what other people expect out of their education. Some people just expect to go around and have a good time, and then some other people just expect a straight up education and straight up learning rather than just having a great experience. Like some people, you know, go to school and, I mean, a lot of the time hope that their teachers probably aren't here so that they could just, you know, watch a movie during class or something rather than learning the subject that they have to learn, because maybe their teacher isn't so-called a fun teacher according to them. But, I mean, it's also not, like, being an educator isn't always about just being fun. It's about being fun while also actually teaching the subject that they're supposed to be teaching, because the students do need to still learn these things, and you can't just be so like super lenient about everything. I mean, you have to kind of push them to do the work that they need to do.
Do you think the definition of what is a good teacher has changed for you over the years between elementary school and middle school and high school? Or if you look back, do you decide, oh, my third grade teacher, she was such a great teacher. What made her memorable compared to another teacher? My second grade teacher is still in my head one of the most memorable teachers I ever had.
Yeah, my definition has definitely changed over time. I was 100% guilty of being one of the kids who was like, I really just only cared if my teacher was nice, because I just don't get along with very strict, mean people a lot of the time.
I think we all feel that.
Yeah. But looking back, I did have a lot of value based on the teachers that were nice and weren't absolutely miserable teaching. Those were the teachers I did best with, and the ones that I had a relationship with I did better with. I have one teacher in my head that I did not do well with because she was just miserable all the time, so the entire class was miserable.
Yeah, and I agree. I try to think if I'm not having fun or if I'm bored, my students have got to be bored.
I kind of think of it like, you know, of course, education, the structure of it changes from elementary to middle school to high school, especially in like the structure of classes. I mean, you have sometimes in middle school and high school the same teacher every other day, or sometimes every day, sometimes every fourth day or whatnot. But then in, you know, the elementary schools, you have the same teacher literally every single day because you're stuck in the same classroom with the same teacher, with the same people every single day. And I think that, you know, sometimes maybe even the teacher kind of gets sick of being around the same people too. But the way that they teach, because they have to teach multiple subjects, like the same person teaching multiple subjects, and I think that sometimes they don't understand that even in elementary school, you know, the students get kind of exhausted. And I remember my 4th grade teacher, she was like one of my best teachers ever. She was so memorable, and she could tell, like, just from looking at us when we were exhausted from learning something, or if we just had like a tough day when we had a test or something. And she would bring in her guitar and play songs for us sometimes, and it was just a nice break. And I think that as time goes on, the students also become more aware of like how exhausted they are. And
I agree. I would
Yeah.
love to have a conversation just about the structure of the school day in a separate podcast.
Yeah, and then as you transition into, middle school and high school, you have multiple classes with different teachers. So you're going to have multiple different kinds of homework. I mean, you can have up to sometimes like 3 hours of homework and then more if you're actually like
Yeah,
studying.
that would go into my school day structure. I think
Yeah.
everyone knows how I feel about homework.
And then,
Yeah.
some of the teachers, a lot of the kids complain, oh, I have this much homework for this class, like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this done, but then the teachers just don't understand that. And yet they assign so much homework all the time anyway, especially when it comes to, having to write an essay based off of something, having to read this much of a book. And I know that you have to get through everything, but also judge it based off of what your students also have
So a
on their
teacher
plate.
who gives homework would be a bad teacher, correct?
Well, not just homework. Homework is definitely a good thing. I believe in homework 110%. But having a super extensive amount of homework, like, you should not be doing 2 hours of homework a night for one class unless it's
So for the
you're
teachers
studying.
listening to this, less homework, you're going to be a better teacher instantly. That's what they should take away from this.
Yes.
Well, not
I don't want to become a
exactly.
whole homework conversation.
Yeah,
but-
I know, but it's the fact that the educators need to have a better grip on how their students are feeling, because if you're putting such a big load on them all the time, every day, they're not gonna put all of their effort into it. They're gonna do a lot of things just to get it done.
I agree with that, especially if homework is assigned for time management as opposed to learning. But again, that's another
That's a whole
that's
other
another
topic.
conversation.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, the two of you also spent your high school career surviving the pandemic, where your freshman year school ended in March 13th,
Yeah.
and then sophomore year was the weird hybrid. Were either of you at home sophomore year 100%, or were both of you hybrid? Did your idea of good and bad teaching sort of change between COVID, hybrid, last year, half year of masks, now we're kind of back to normal? Do you think the past 4 years has changed your view of what makes a teacher a good teacher?
Yes. I had quite a couple teachers that over COVID, they seemed to get a little lazy, for lack of a better word, where they would assign, like, videos that wasn't even of them. Like, if you know Kurt Weiler,
Kirk Weiler.
the
Or-
Man taught us algebra too.
If you know the Amoeba Sisters, they
That's
took
true.
they took over science like there was no tomorrow.
yeah, they would assign videos to teach subjects, and then they wouldn't give any form of lectures or teaching. And then it was all on the students to figure things out. And I definitely did not really, I guess, fit with that kind of teaching style, because I feel like I need actual engagement and structure from a teacher instead of a teacher just sitting around and then when you go to ask a question being like, figure it out.
For me, really, my view on like the style of education didn't really change that much. I mean, I've always kind of been the type of person that would just do a lot of extra learning on my own anyway, so my education didn't actually alter all that much. And during the hybrid year, I was in and out of school, and then I actually ended up being one of the few people that could come in every day, which I think, helped a lot, but it's also some of the teachers taught about half of what they were supposed to do for the year, like the entire year, which kind of altered how we learned after that, because, we had the same teacher, me, Morgan, both, and, you're just learning half of what you're really supposed to do,
Yeah,
because
I
they
think-
wouldn't do the online thing. Like, you would check in for attendance, and then you would only actually learn the day that you were in school, which was kind of weird. But, as for the actual education itself, I mean, I think that some of the teachers were kind of just trying to adjust to what it is that they were supposed to do, because it happened so fast, and they didn't really have time to, figure out what the best approach would be. But I think that some educators could have learned from some of the other ones within the same building
Yeah.
as to what would work best.
Let me take a moment because this was our first time, I just posted a Padlet. For those who don't know, it's basically a message board for students who couldn't participate, asking them what makes a good teacher. So let me just read a couple of these and then get your comments. I had some things like you said, what makes a good teacher: someone who has good skills in communicating, listening, empathy, patience, someone who understands that kids do other things and don't always have time to do homework, someone who helps the kids grow from their mistakes, someone who doesn't let kids get away with everything, someone who understands the kids' potential and tries to push them, helps them grow from their mistakes. I hear understand a lot. A good teacher is someone who knows how to help students accept and learn from their mistakes, interacts kindly with their students, helping students. So a lot of things you've said, and I even read there, is what makes a good teacher doesn't have a lot to actually do with, in our world, teaching, pedagogy, assessments. It's a good person is who would make a good teacher. Do you find that you're still learning, or are there good teachers, but you don't really learn much? And there's not as good teachers, but you feel like you're learning more from them. Does that make sense to you? Like, can you be a good person, a good teacher in that sense, but you're not really learning anything, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there's definitely, like, you obviously still have to teach the material. I just stand by my first statement with the teacher has to be engaged in what they're teaching and has to know what they're talking about. Otherwise, then you're not really learning anything.
You know, a lot of what you just read said was that teachers help their students learn from their mistakes, and I think that that's super important. You know, there's things that, like, some teachers don't allow their kids to do test corrections, which I find not helpful.
That would be me. I mean, you can do test corrections, I just don't do them for grades, but hopefully, as you do know, we go over tests.
But it's like,
I don't want to leave it out there, but just defending myself.
Well, some teachers will just hand back a test and be like, okay, you got what you got, we're not going to go over it, like, figure it out yourself. And it's like, the students aren't going to learn anything. You're not learning from your mistakes. You're going to keep making the same mistake over and over and over again.
I like what you said, because personally I think self-reflection and self-learning is really important. Anything the two of you want to add at the end of our first podcast?
I've had some pretty cool teachers this year, so shout out to them if you're listening to this. Love you guys.
Yeah, you know, just some ending remarks. I think that, you know, every teacher's going to have a different style of how they teach. I mean, sometimes they could be basing it off of one of the educators that they had that worked for them, and it just might not work for, you know, some of their students. But again, it's not always just on the teacher, it's also on the students.
I want to thank Morgan and Alexis so much with our inaugural podcast, and there are topics that you want to hear about. There's probably a way to message this little show wherever you get your podcast, so go download, go to Science, the number 4, Dummies, that is my TikTok, to see what's going on out there, and hopefully you'll join us next week for our next topic. Thank you.